March 15, 1962. Steve McQueen walked into Marcus Whitman's office for what should have been a career-making audition. Instead, Whitman humiliated him for 23 minutes while cameras rolled, called him a pretty boy hack, laughed until tears ran down his face, then told security to escort McQueen out through the service entrance like garbage. Whitman kept that tape. He kept them all. Insurance policies against anyone who might threaten him later. 60 years later, someone found those tapes. Someone who knows exactly how to use them. And as Marcus Whitman watches his empire burn one leaked video at a time, he's about to discover that the person destroying him learned everything they know about calculated revenge from watching him. The hunter has become the hunted. The king is about to meet his executioner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The package sat on Vinny's kitchen table like a bomb waiting to detonate. Brown paper, no return address, postmarked from Los Angeles 3 days ago. Inside, 2 film reels and a single white card with elegant script that made his hands shake. The King of Cool sends his regards. Vinny's coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he couldn't stop staring at those reels. The label on the first one read, October 15, 1958, Stage 7. His throat constricted. Nobody filmed auditions back then. Nobody except the doorbell rang. Vinny's chair scraped against the linoleum as he stood, every joint in his 62-year-old body protesting. Through the peephole of his modest Bakersfield bungalow, he saw a young woman with auburn hair and nervous energy. Sarah Martinez, his granddaughter, though she'd kept her mother's maiden name for her acting career. Grandpa Vinny? Her voice carried that familiar tremor she'd had since childhood when something was wrong. He unlatched the chain, noting how his fingers fumbled with the simple mechanism. Sarah, sweetheart, what brings you out here on a Tuesday? She pushed past him, designer heels clicking on his worn hardwood floors. Everything about her screamed rising starlet, the perfectly tousled hair, the calculated casualness of her outfit, the way she moved like cameras were always watching. At 25, she was everything Hollywood promised young actresses they could become. I got the weirdest call yesterday, she said, pacing his small living room. Some producer claims he knew you back in the day. Said he had a part perfect for me, but wanted to meet you first. Kept asking about your time at Paramount. The blood drained from Vinny's face. What was his name? Steve something. Steve McKenna? Mackenzie? She stopped pacing, studying his expression. Grandpa, you look like you've seen a ghost. McQueen. Did you meet with him? Vinny's voice came out as a rasp. That's just it. When I called the number back, it was disconnected. But here's the weird part. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her photos. Look what was waiting outside my apartment this morning. The screen showed a vintage motorcycle, a 1963 Triumph TR6 trophy. Steve McQueen's bike from The Great Escape. Vinny's legs gave out. He sank into his recliner, the same chair where he'd spent countless nights over the past 40 years trying to forget that October evening in 1958. Sarah was beside him instantly, her hand on his shoulder. Grandpa, what's going on? You're scaring me. He looked at his granddaughter, really looked at her. The determination in her jawline, the intelligence behind those dark eyes, the way she held herself with quiet confidence despite her nerves. She had what it took to make it in Hollywood, but that industry was a meat grinder that destroyed more dreams than it fulfilled. And now something was hunting her because of his sins. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. He gripped her hands, feeling how soft they were compared to his weathered fingers. Cancel any meetings you have scheduled. Don't take calls from numbers you don't recognize. And whatever you do, don't go back to your apartment alone. You're freaking me out. What does this have to do with some motorcycle and a phantom producer? Vinny glanced at the film reels on his kitchen table. The past wasn't dead. It was in his house, demanding payment for a debt he'd hoped was buried with Harold Brennan's empire. He'd spent decades building a quiet life in Bakersfield, running his small community theater, teaching acting classes to kids who dreamed of bigger stages. He'd convinced himself that what happened to Steve McQueen was just business, just how Hollywood worked, but those blue eyes had promised something different that night. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, revenge. "There are things about my time in Hollywood I never told you," he said finally. "Things I'm not proud of, decisions that seemed right at the time, but—" He trailed off, watching fear creep across Sarah's features. What kind of things? Before he could answer, his landline rang. The shrill sound cut through the afternoon silence like a blade. They both stared at the old rotary phone on his kitchen counter. It rang again, and again. "Don't answer it," Sarah whispered. On the fourth ring, Vinny's answering machine clicked on. His own voice played back, "You've reached Vincent Torino. Please leave a message." The beep echoed through his small house. Then, clear as if the man were standing in the room with them, came a voice Vinny recognized despite 4 decades of trying to forget it. Slightly gravelly, measured, cold as winter steel. "Hello, Vinny. We need to talk." The line went dead, but the silence that followed felt anything but peaceful. It felt like the quiet before an earthquake, when the animals know to run but the humans haven't figured it out yet. Sarah's fingernails dug into his arm. "Grandpa, who was that?" Vinny stared at the phone, knowing with absolute certainty that his 40-year reprieve had just ended. Vinny couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came. The voice on the answering machine had transported him back to stage 7 at Paramount, to the moment when a young actor with hungry eyes had walked into what he thought was his big break and walked out destroyed. Sarah's grip on his arm tightened. "Grandpa, you're shaking." He was. His whole body trembled like autumn leaves in a windstorm. The smell of his house, old coffee, dust, the lavender potpourri his late wife had favored, suddenly felt suffocating. Everything familiar and safe was crumbling around him. "That voice," he whispered. "It can't be." Whose voice? Who was that man? Before he could answer, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text message. She glanced at the screen and went pale. "What is it?" Vinny asked. "A photo." Her voice was barely audible. It's me, walking into your house 20 minutes ago." Vinny's chest constricted. Someone was watching them, right now. He moved to the window, careful to stay behind the faded curtains his wife had sewn 30 years ago. The street looked normal, Mrs. Chen watering her roses next door, old Murphy walking his ancient beagle, the mailman making his afternoon rounds. But somewhere in that ordinary tableau, predator eyes were fixed on his home. "Sarah, I need you to go to my bedroom closet. Behind my old suits, there's a metal box. Grandpa, please." The desperation in his voice surprised them both. "Just do this for me." She disappeared down the narrow hallway, her heels muffled on the carpet runner. Vinny pressed his forehead against the cool window glass, trying to steady his breathing. 42 years. That's how long he'd lived with the weight of that October night. 42 years of waking up in cold sweats, of seeing those blue eyes in his nightmares, of jumping every time someone mentioned Steve McQueen's name. He thought the actor's death in 1980 had finally freed him. When the news broke about the cancer, about McQueen's quiet final months in Mexico, Vinny had actually cried, not from grief, but from relief. The debt was canceled. The threat was over. Apparently, he'd been wrong. Found it. Sarah returned carrying a dented metal strongbox, the kind sold at hardware stores for $20. "What's in here?" "My insurance policy." Vinny's arthritic fingers fumbled with the combination lock. 3/15/58, the date that changed everything. The box clicked open, revealing yellowed documents, faded photographs, and a single reel of film marked with Harold Brennan's personal seal. Sarah picked up a photograph from 1958. Young Vinny stood beside a heavy-set man in an expensive suit outside Paramount's gates. Both were laughing at something off-camera. "Is that you? You look so different." She studied his face in the photo, confident, ambitious, unmarked by decades of guilt. "Who's the other man?" "Harold Brennan, studio head, my boss." Vinny's voice carried the weight of every compromise, every soul-selling decision that had followed. "He made me into everything I swore I'd never become." "Made you into what?" "A destroyer of dreams." The words hung between them like smoke. Sarah set the photograph down carefully. her reporter's instincts sensing a story that went deeper than family history. "Tell me about that night, the one you won't talk about." Vinny closed his eyes, but that only made the memories sharper. The humid October evening, the nervous energy crackling through stage 7, Harold Brennan's whispered instructions: "Make sure this McQueen kid never works in this town again. He's been asking too many questions about the wrong people." "There was this actor," Vinny began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Young guy from the Midwest. Tough background, military service, but hungry for something better. He had this quality, this magnetism that jumped off screen. In another world, he could have been the biggest star of his generation. What happened to him? I killed his career before it started." Sarah's face crumpled with confusion and disappointment. "Why?" "Because Harold told me to. Because I was weak. Because I thought my own survival mattered more than some kids' dreams." The confession felt like swallowing broken glass. "We set up a fake audition. Made him think he was screen testing for a major role. Instead, we filmed him in the most humiliating situations we could devise. Then we made sure every casting director in Hollywood saw those reels." The afternoon light streaming through his windows seemed dimmer now, as if the house itself was ashamed of what it had witnessed. Sarah stared at him like he was a stranger. "The man on the phone," she said slowly. "It was him, wasn't it?" "The actor," Vinny nodded. "Steve McQueen. And according to the world, he's been dead for over 40 years. Outside, a car door slammed. They both froze, listening to footsteps approaching on the gravel driveway. Slow, deliberate, the walk of someone who had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. The footsteps stopped at his front door. 3 soft knocks echoed through the house. Not the urgent rapping of someone in distress, not the authoritative pounding of law enforcement. These knocks were patient, almost polite, the sound of someone who knew exactly what lay behind the door and was content to wait. Sarah's eyes darted between Vinny and the front door. "Should we?" "No." Vinny's whisper was sharp. "Don't move, don't breathe." But even as he said it, he knew it was futile. Whoever stood on his porch wasn't going anywhere. The silence stretched between the knocks like a held breath, and Vinny found himself counting his own heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, until the next gentle rap came. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the screen. "I'm calling the police." "And tell them what? That a dead movie star is at my door?" Vinny's laugh came out bitter and broken. "They'll think we're having a psychotic episode." The knocking stopped. In the sudden quiet, Vinny could hear Mrs. Chen's sprinkler system cycling on next door. The distant hum of traffic on Highway 99. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday afternoon in Bakersfield. Life continuing as normal while his world collapsed. Then came the voice, muffled by the door but unmistakably clear. "Vinny, I know you're in there. We both know this conversation is 40 years overdue." Sarah grabbed her grandfather's arm so tightly her nails drew blood through his flannel shirt. The voice was exactly what they'd heard on the answering machine. Gravelly, controlled, carrying an undertone of something that might have been amusement if it weren't so cold. "I'm not going anywhere, old friend. We've got all day." Vinny's legs felt like water. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Steve McQueen died in 1980 in a Mexican clinic, fighting mesothelioma and refusing conventional treatment. Vinny had read every obituary, watched every tribute, attended the memorial service at Forest Lawn. He'd seen the death certificate, but Harold Brennan had taught him long ago that in Hollywood, even death could be faked with the right connections and enough money. "Sarah," he whispered, "there's a back door through the kitchen. My car keys are on the counter. I want you to—" "I'm not leaving you. This isn't about you. Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet?" Before Vinny could answer, his landline rang again. The shrill sound made them both jump. 1 ring, 2. On the 3rd ring, the answering machine clicked on. "You've reached Vincent Torino. Please leave a message." Beep. "You know, Vinny, your answering machine message hasn't changed since 1987. I've been calling periodically over the years, just to hear your voice, just to remind myself why I've spent 4 decades planning this moment." Sarah's face had gone chalk white. She mouthed the words 4 decades like she couldn't believe them. "I've been patient, methodical. Do you know what I've been doing all these years while the world thought Steve McQueen was 6 feet under? Building an empire. Every major star you've seen rise to fame in the last 40 years, every Oscar winner, every box office champion, every household name, they all owe their careers to me. I became what Harold Brennan pretended to be, the invisible hand that shapes Hollywood's destiny. Vinny sank deeper into his recliner, the weight of understanding crushing down on him. The biggest stars of the 80s, 90s, and beyond, all of them connected to a dead man's revenge. But you were always the prize, Vinny. The last name on my list. I saved you for last because I wanted you to live with what you'd done. I wanted you to age and soften and build a life you could lose. And now you have something precious, something worth protecting. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another text. This time, when she looked at the screen, she made a sound like a wounded animal. "What?" Vinny demanded. She turned the phone toward him. The photo showed Sarah's apartment building in Los Angeles. The second image was her bedroom window, taken from inside. Someone had been in her home, touching her things, photographing her private space. "Your granddaughter has real talent, by the way," the voice on the machine continued. "Natural charisma. The camera loves her. With the right guidance, she could be bigger than Julia Roberts, bigger than Meryl Streep. I could make her the most famous actress in the world." A pause. Then, softer, "Or I could make her disappear entirely." The line went dead. Vinny looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and saw his own terror reflected in her dark eyes. The afternoon light streaming through his windows now seemed harsh and unforgiving, illuminating every line on his weathered face, every sign of the weakness that had led them to this moment. Outside, the footsteps resumed, not moving away from the door, but walking slowly around the house, circling, hunting. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Grandpa, what did you do to him?" Vinny closed his eyes, knowing that whatever came next, his 40 years of hiding were over. Vinny opened his eyes and stared at his granddaughter's terrified face. The question hung between them like a blade, and he knew there was no more running from it. No more hiding behind decades of silence and self-justification. "We broke him," he said finally, completely. Not just his career, his spirit. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down her phone. The footsteps outside had stopped again, but somehow the silence felt worse than the circling. It was the quiet of a predator that had finished stalking and was now ready to strike. "I don't understand. You said you filmed him, humiliated him, but—" "It wasn't just the audition." Vinny's voice cracked. Harold Brennan was connected to people, dangerous people. McQueen had been asking questions about some of the studio's financing, about where certain investments came from. He was too smart for his own good, too honest for Hollywood. The memories flooded back with sickening clarity. The way Steve's face had changed when he realized what was really happening in that audition room. The transformation from eager hope to confusion to dawning horror. The sound of his voice when he'd finally understood that every person in that room was working against him. "They made me lie to him for weeks first," Vinny continued, his words coming faster now, like poison being purged. "Told him he was being considered for the lead in a major war picture. Had him come in for chemistry reads with actresses who were in on it. Made him believe he was this close to stardom. Sarah was backing away from him, one small step at a time, as if the grandfather she'd known was dissolving before her eyes. Then came the real audition. October 15th. We told him it was his final screen test, that the director would be watching from New York via closed circuit. Instead, we had him perform scenes designed to make him look unstable, desperate. We fed him false lines, gave him props that broke at crucial moments, had actresses deliberately sabotage his takes. "My God," Sarah whispered. But the worst part, the part that still wakes me up at night, was at the end. When it was over, when we'd captured hours of footage of him failing and flailing and growing more frantic with each take, Harold had me tell him the truth, had me explain exactly what we'd done and why. Vinny could still see Steve's face in that moment, the way his blue eyes had gone dead, like someone had reached in and turned off a light that had burned bright since childhood. The young man who'd walked into stage 7 full of dreams and determination was gone, replaced by something hollow and broken. He just stood there and took it, didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't even defend himself. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You have no idea what you've just created." Then he walked out, Sarah had reached the wall now, pressing her back against it as if she needed physical support. So he left Hollywood? We thought so. The footage Harold made sure got circulated. It destroyed any chance McQueen had of working for a legitimate studio. Word spread that he was difficult, unstable, a liability. No one would touch him. Vinny's phone buzzed. A text message to his ancient flip phone, which shouldn't have been possible since he'd never given anyone the number. With shaking fingers, he opened it. The message contained a single photograph. Young Steve McQueen, but not from 1958. This picture was from maybe 1965, and he was standing behind a movie camera wearing a director's jacket. But his eyes, those ice-blue eyes that had haunted Vinny's dreams, were different, harder, colder, calculating. He didn't leave Hollywood, Vinny said, understanding flooding through him like ice water. He went underground. Sarah moved closer to look at the phone. What do you mean? The accidents that started happening to people connected to that audition. Nothing traceable, nothing obvious. A screenwriter who had a nervous breakdown, an actress who suddenly couldn't get work, a cameraman who developed a drinking problem that destroyed his reputation. Vinny scrolled through more photos that were somehow appearing on his phone in real time. Steve McQueen at industry parties through the decades, always in the background, always slightly out of focus, sometimes bearded, sometimes clean-shaven, occasionally wearing glasses or a hat, but always there, always watching. We thought we'd buried him, Vinny said. Instead, we'd taught him how to become invisible, how to work from the shadows, how to be patient. A new photo appeared, Sarah's headshot from her latest casting call, but with red X's marked over her eyes. Sarah snatched the phone from his hands, staring at her own defaced image. This is insane. People they don't spend 40 years planning revenge. They move on. They build new lives. You don't understand what we took from him, Vinny said. It wasn't just a job or even a career. We took his faith in human decency. We taught him that everyone can be bought, that trust is a weakness, that the only way to survive is to have power over others. The footsteps resumed outside, but now they were different, heavier, multiple sets. Steve McQueen wasn't alone anymore. Vinny looked at his granddaughter and felt his heart break all over again. We created a monster, Sarah, and now he's come to collect what we owe him. The silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then Sarah straightened, her journalist's instincts overriding her fear. Show me the film reel, she said, pointing to the metal box. The one with Brennan's seal. If this is really happening, I need to see what you did to him. Vinny's hands shook as he lifted the canister. The metal was cold and heavier than he remembered, weighted with decades of shame. Sarah, you don't want to. Yes, I do. Her voice was steel now, harder than he'd ever heard it. If my life is in danger because of something you did 40 years ago, I deserve to know exactly what that was. The old 16mm projector sat in the corner where it had gathered dust for 20 years. Vinny had kept it as a reminder, a form of self-punishment. Now, with trembling fingers, he threaded the film and switched on the lamp. The wall flickered to life with grainy black and white images. Steve McQueen at 28, impossibly young and handsome, walking onto stage 7 with a confidence that made Vinny's chest ache. The boy believed he was about to become a star. Jesus, Sarah whispered. He looks like you, Vinny finished. Same eyes, same way of moving. Harold noticed it the first day McQueen walked in. Said he had that thing, the indefinable quality that separates movie stars from actors. On screen, young Steve was performing a dramatic scene, pouring his heart into lines they'd written specifically to make him look unhinged. The dialogue was garbage, overwrought, psychotic rambling, but he was trying to find truth in it, to make it work through sheer force of will. Behind the camera, barely visible in the frame's edge, stood a younger Vinny, watching, judging, preparing to deliver the killing blow. My God, Grandpa, look at how hard he's trying. The worst was yet to come. Vinny fast-forwarded to the final scene, the one where they'd told Steve the truth. The camera kept rolling as Harold Brennan stepped into frame and began explaining the setup. They watched Steve's face change in real time, hope dying by degrees as the reality sank in. But it was what happened next that Vinny had tried to forget. After the initial shock wore off, Steve had done something unexpected. He'd looked directly into the camera, directly at the future audience he somehow knew would watch this footage, and smiled. Not the broken smile of a defeated man. The cold, calculating smile of someone making a promise. "You think this ends here?" Steve's voice, young but already carrying that gravelly undertone, filled Vinny's living room. "You think you've won something? This is just the beginning. Every single person in this room is going to pay for this day. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but eventually. I'm going to learn from you. I'm going to become better at this game than you ever dreamed of being." The film ran out, leaving them in sudden darkness. Sarah's breathing was loud in the quiet room. "He knew," she said finally. Even then, he was already planning this. Vinny nodded, unable to speak. He'd watched that final moment hundreds of times over the years, but seeing it again with Sarah beside him made it fresh horror. They hadn't just destroyed a career, they'd created their own nemesis. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time the message was text only. "Still watching the home movies, Vinny? I've got the master copy. Every studio head in Hollywood has seen it. They know what kind of man Vincent Torino really is." He's been planning this reveal for decades, Vinny realized, waiting for the right moment to destroy my reputation. But he needed leverage first. He needed you. Why me specifically? There have to be other people from that day still alive. "Because you're the only thing I actually love." The truth came out raw and unfiltered. "He studied me, Sarah. For 40 years he's watched me live my life, raise my family, try to build something good on a foundation of rot, and he knows that losing you would destroy me completely." Outside, the footsteps had stopped again, but now they could hear something else, the soft sound of someone picking the lock on the back door. "He's coming in," Sarah whispered. Vinny reached into the metal box and pulled out a snub-nosed revolver. His hands were steadier now, focused by desperation. "The bedroom window. You can drop onto the garage roof, then down to the yard. Take my car and drive straight to the police station. What about you? This was my sin, sweetheart. It's time I faced the consequences." But even as he said it, Vinny knew it was too late. The soft click of the back door opening echoed through the house, followed by the measured footsteps of a man who had waited 40 years for this moment. Steve McQueen was inside. The footsteps moved through Vinny's kitchen with deliberate slowness, each step calculated to build terror. Sarah pressed herself against the bedroom wall, her grandfather's revolver trembling in his arthritic hands as they listened to their hunter approach. "The window," Vinny mouthed silently, but Sarah shook her head. Something in her expression had changed, a hardness he'd never seen before. The footsteps stopped outside the living room. Then came a voice that made Vinny's blood freeze. "Hello, Vinny. It's been a long time." But it wasn't the gravelly tone they'd heard on the answering machine. This voice was younger, smoother, familiar in a way that made Sarah gasp and step forward before Vinny could stop her. "Marcus," she called out. A figure appeared in the doorway, and Vinny's world tilted sideways. Not the 73-year-old Steve McQueen he'd been expecting, but Sarah's agent, Marcus Sterling, 35, perfectly styled, wearing his usual expensive suit and practiced smile. "Hello, Sarah. Grandfather." Marcus nodded politely, as if he'd simply stopped by for dinner. Sarah lowered the gun she'd taken from Vinny's shaking hands. "What the hell are you doing here? How did you even know where my own client's grandfather lives?" Marcus stepped into the room, his movements fluid and confident. "Sarah, I've represented you for 3 years. I know everything about your life, your family, your secrets." Understanding crashed over Vinny like ice water. "You're working for him." Marcus laughed, a sound that carried no warmth. "Working for him? Oh, Vinny, you still don't understand, do you? Even after watching that film reel, even after 40 years of paranoia, you still can't see what's right in front of you." He walked to the window, pulling the curtains closed with casual efficiency. "Let me ask you something, Sarah. When did we first meet? Do you remember? The Paramount lot, 3 years ago. You said you'd been watching my career, that you wanted to—" "I said I'd been watching you, not your career. You." Marcus turned back to them, and something fundamental had shifted in his posture, his voice, the way he held himself. I've been watching you since you were born, actually. Waiting for you to grow up. Waiting for you to become beautiful and talented enough to matter to the old man." Sarah's face went white. "That's impossible. You're 35 years old." "Am I?" Marcus reached up and began peeling something away from his face, a thin, nearly invisible prosthetic that had been adding years to his appearance. Underneath, his features were sharper, more angular. When he straightened, his posture changed completely, and suddenly he seemed both younger and infinitely older. "Hollywood taught me many things, Vinny. How to disappear, how to reinvent myself, how to become anyone I needed to be." The voice was changing too, the careful modulation falling away to reveal something colder underneath. "Do you know how easy it is to buy a new identity when you control half the entertainment industry? How simple it is to create a backstory, plant references, build a reputation from nothing?" Vinny's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his chair. The man standing before them removed colored contacts, revealing eyes of startling ice blue. "Steve," he whispered. "I prefer Marcus these days. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Though I've been dozens of other people over the years. Producers, directors, agents, always behind the scenes, always invisible, building an empire on the bones of the industry that tried to bury me." Sarah was backing toward the wall again, but now she was staring at Marcus, at Steve, with a different kind of horror. "The callbacks, the roles I've gotten, the opportunities that seem too good to be true. All me, sweetheart. Every audition, every part, every step of your little career has been orchestrated by your dear old grandfather's victim." He smiled, and it was the same cold expression from the film reel, perfected over 40 years of practice. "I made you into exactly what I needed, successful enough to matter to him, but not so successful that you'd be beyond my reach." "You son of a bitch," Vinny snarled, trying to stand. "She had nothing to do with—" "She has everything to do with it." The mask slipped completely now, revealing the rage that had been burning for 4 decades. "You took my life from me, Vinny. My dreams, my future, my ability to trust anyone. So I'm taking yours. But first, I wanted you to watch me build something beautiful with your granddaughter's talent. I wanted you to see her succeed and know that every moment of her happiness was a gift from the man you destroyed." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "The contracts I signed, the exclusivity clauses, make you completely dependent on me." "Yes," Steve's smile returned. "You belong to me now, Sarah, just like everyone else in this town who matters. And your grandfather gets to live with that knowledge for whatever time he has left." The revelation hit Vinny like a physical blow. He'd been right about the revenge, but wrong about everything else. Steve McQueen hadn't faked his death and returned as an old man seeking final vengeance. He'd become ageless, invisible, and infinitely patient. And he'd already won. The silence that followed Steve's revelation stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with 40 years of accumulated rage and guilt. Vinny stared at the man who had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years, wearing his granddaughter's trust like a perfectly tailored mask. "You want to know the beautiful irony of it all?" Steve moved to the mantelpiece, running his finger along the framed photos of Sarah's career milestones, headshots, red carpet moments, award ceremonies. Every time she called you, excited about a new role, every time she thanked you for believing in her dreams, you were actually celebrating my generosity. Your pride in her success? That was me feeding your joy moment by moment so I could devour it all at once. Sarah found her voice, though it came out cracked and small. "The callback for the Scorsese film. You said I reminded you of someone. I said you reminded me of myself at your age, full of hope, full of trust." Steve's fingers stopped on a photo of Sarah's first magazine cover. "The difference is, I'm going to make sure your dreams come true. All of them. You'll be bigger than Julia Roberts, more influential than Meryl Streep. The whole world will know your name." "And then?" Vinny asked, though he already knew the answer. "And then I'll take it all away." Steve turned back to them, his ice-blue eyes reflecting the lamplight like a predator's. "Every role will dry up overnight. Every door that opened will slam shut. She'll spend the rest of her life wondering what she did wrong, why the industry suddenly turned against her, just like I did." Except you know why this is happening, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. I never would. You'd let me torture myself forever, trying to figure out what invisible sin I'd committed. Quick study. I always liked that about you. Steve's smile was almost proud. But you're thinking too small, sweetheart. The plan isn't just to destroy your career, it's to make you complicit in destroying others. He pulled out a manila folder that had been tucked inside his jacket. These are contracts for your next 3 films. Big budget, A-list co-stars, guaranteed Oscar campaigns. All you have to do is sign them. Sarah didn't move toward the folder. What's the catch? Read the fine print. Buried deep in the legal language, you'll find clauses that give you creative input on casting decisions. You'll have the power to approve or reject your CO stars, your directors, even your crew members. Vinny's heart sank as he understood. You want her to become the weapon. Every person who gets rejected because Sarah Sterling decided they weren't right for the role, they'll blame her. Every career that gets derailed when she exercises her contractual authority to fire someone, that's on her conscience, not mine. Within 5 years, she'll be the most powerful and most hated woman in Hollywood. And she won't even realize she's been orchestrating other people's destruction until it's far too late to stop. The folder lay on the coffee table between them like a loaded gun. Sarah stared at it as if it might bite her. And if I refuse? Then your grandfather dies tonight, and you spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved him. Plus, those exclusivity clauses I mentioned, they have penalty clauses that would bankrupt you for the next 3 lifetimes. You'd never work again anyway, and you'd spend every day knowing you chose pride over family. Vinny watched his granddaughter's face as the full scope of the trap became clear. Steve had spent 3 years building a cage so perfect that every possible choice led to destruction. Compliance meant becoming a destroyer of others. Refusal meant watching her grandfather die and losing everything anyway. There's a third option, Vinny said quietly. Both Sarah and Steve turned to look at him. The old casting director struggled to his feet, his arthritic joints protesting, but his voice was steady for the first time all evening. You want revenge on me, Steve? Take it. I'm 72 years old. I've been carrying the weight of what I did to you for 4 decades. I'm tired of running from it. Grandpa, no, but leave her out of it. She's innocent in this. Your quarrel is with me and the men who ordered that audition. Most of them are dead already. I'm the last one left. Steve's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. You think I haven't thought of that? You think the quick, clean solution didn't occur to me? Vinny, if I'd wanted you dead, you'd have been dead years ago. This was never about ending your life. This was about making sure you understand exactly what you cost me. He gestured toward the contracts again. Your granddaughter's soul, Vinny. That's the price. The same price you charged me 40 years ago when you taught me that human decency was just another commodity to be bought and sold. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Vinny's old mantel clock, counting down the moments until a decision could no longer be avoided. The ticking of the mantel clock seemed to grow louder with each passing second, marking the rhythm of 3 hearts beating in a room thick with decades of accumulated pain. Vinny felt the weight of every choice he'd made since 1958 pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. You know what the real tragedy is, Steve? Vinny's voice carried a new quality, not the trembling fear of the hunted, but the steady resignation of a man who had finally stopped running. I've spent 40 years hating myself for what we did to you. 40 years watching every young actor who walked into my theater, wondering if I was looking at the next person whose dreams I'd helped destroy. Steve's perfectly controlled expression flickered. Spare me the redemption speech, Vinny. Guilt doesn't absolve. I'm not looking for absolution. Vinny took a step forward, and something in his bearing made Steve instinctively step back. I'm telling you that the man you've spent 4 decades hunting is already dead, has been for years. You've been chasing a ghost, Steve, fighting a war that ended before you even started planning your revenge. Sarah watched her grandfather with new eyes as he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. You want to know what killed me? It wasn't fear of your vengeance. It wasn't even guilt exactly. It was the gradual realization that I'd become everything I'd hated about this business. A man who could look at pure talent, pure hope, and choose to destroy it for money. Touching, Steve said. but his voice had lost some of its edge. "But it doesn't change." "Look at her," Vinny interrupted, gesturing towards Sarah. "Really look at her, Steve. She has your fire, your talent, your absolute refusal to compromise when it matters. Don't you see what you're about to do? You're about to become Harold Brennan. You're about to stand in a room with a young person who has everything you once had and destroy them to make yourself feel powerful." For the first time since revealing himself, Steve McQueen looked uncertain. His gaze shifted to Sarah, who stood frozen by the wall, and something human flickered behind those ice-blue eyes. "It's not the same," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Isn't it? You're offering her a choice between her soul and her survival. How is that different from what Harold offered you? How is that different from what he offered me?" Vinny's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You've become the very thing you hated most. The only question is whether you're strong enough to stop yourself before you finish the job." Sarah chose that moment to step forward, her fear transforming into something fiercer. "You want to punish him? Fine. Destroy his reputation, his legacy, his peace of mind. But don't make me into your weapon. Don't turn me into another link in this chain of cruelty." She moved to the coffee table and swept the contracts onto the floor. "I won't sign them. Not because I'm choosing my grandfather over my career, and not because I'm afraid of your threats. I won't sign them because the woman you helped me become, the actress you trained, the professional you mentored, she's better than this. And somewhere underneath all that rage, so are you." Steve stared at the scattered papers, his carefully constructed plan literally in tatters at his feet. For a moment the mask slipped completely, and they could see the 28-year-old actor who had walked onto stage 7 with such hope in his heart. "You don't understand," he said, his voice suddenly small. "I gave everything to this business. Everything I had, everything I was. And they laughed at me. They filmed it for posterity." "So you gave them 40 more years," Sarah said gently. 40 years of your life dedicated to proving that their cruelty was justified. 40 years of becoming exactly what they said you were. Dangerous, obsessive, unhinged. Steve McQueen, Hollywood's invisible puppet master, the man who had controlled careers and manipulated destinies for 4 decades, sank into Vinny's old armchair like a deflated balloon. The rage that had sustained him, that had driven every decision and shaped every plan, was finally consuming itself. What else was I supposed to do? The question came out raw, stripped of all artifice. How was I supposed to live with what they took from me? Vinny looked at this broken man who had terrorized him for so long and felt something unexpected, pity. "The same way I learned to live with what I took from you. One day at a time, trying to be better than you were yesterday, building something good on the foundation of something terrible." The old casting director moved slowly to where Steve sat and, after a moment's hesitation, placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. "It's not too late, son, for either of us. The past is fixed, but the future is still ours to write." In the sudden quiet, they could hear the distant sound of sirens approaching. Someone had finally called the police, but none of them moved, frozen in this moment where 40 years of hatred finally had the chance to transform into something else entirely. The sirens grew louder, then stopped abruptly outside Vinny's house. Red and blue lights swept across the living room walls in rhythmic patterns, painting shadows that danced like ghosts of the past 40 years. But inside, the 3 of them remained still, as if movement might shatter whatever fragile understanding had formed between them. Steve, he would always be Steve to Vinny now, not Marcus, not the collection of false identities he'd worn like armor, lifted his head slowly. The face that looked up was neither the broken young actor from the film reel nor the calculating puppet master who had orchestrated decades of revenge. It was something in between, aged by choices rather than years, worn down by the weight of his own carefully constructed prison. "They'll want to know what happened here," he said quietly, nodding toward the front door where voices could be heard approaching. "We could tell them the truth," Sarah offered, though uncertainty colored her words. "Which truth?" Steve's laugh held no bitterness now, only exhaustion. That Marcus Sterling never existed? That half of Hollywood's biggest stars owe their careers to a dead man's elaborate revenge scheme? That the entertainment industry has been unknowingly controlled by someone it tried to erase? Vinny squeezed Steve's shoulder once before stepping back. We tell them what they need to hear, nothing more. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by authoritative knocking. Bakersfield PD. We received reports of a disturbance. Vinny moved toward the door with surprising steadiness. Before opening it, he turned back to look at his granddaughter and the man who had shaped both their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. Sarah, you still have choices to make about your career. Real choices this time. And you? She asked Steve directly. What happens to the empire you built? All those contracts, all those people whose lives you control? Steve was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Hands that had pulled strings across Hollywood for 40 years, orchestrating rises and falls with surgical precision. I suppose I'll have to figure out how to let them go, how to give people back their own destinies. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. That might be the hardest role you've ever played, Vinny said, as he reached for the doorknob, learning how to stop being the director of everyone else's story. The conversation with the police was surprisingly brief. A concerned neighbor had reported raised voices, but by the time officers arrived, they found only a grandfather catching up with his granddaughter and her agent. Yes, there had been an animated discussion about career decisions. You know how these Hollywood types can be. No one was in danger. Just passionate people talking about passionate things. Steve's performance was flawless, slipping back into the Marcus Sterling persona with practiced ease. But Vinny caught the moments when the mask wavered, when genuine exhaustion showed through the careful construction. The man was tired of performing. After the police left, they stood in the sudden quiet of Vinny's living room. The contracts still lay scattered on the floor like fallen leaves, their clauses and legal bindings reduced to meaningless paper. I should go, Steve said, but he made no move toward the door. Where? Sarah asked. I mean, where does someone like you go when you stop being everyone else? The question hung in the air, revealing its profound weight. Steve McQueen had died at 50. Marcus Sterling had never truly lived. The man standing before them was caught between identities, between the young actor he'd been and the shadow puppet master he'd become. I have a house in Montana, he said finally. Bought it years ago, never lived in it. Just kept it as a place that existed outside all the games and manipulations. Maybe it's time to find out who I am when I'm not busy being someone else. Vinny felt something shift in his chest. Not quite forgiveness, not quite peace, but something approaching resolution. For what it's worth, Steve, I hope you find him, the man you were supposed to become. Steve nodded once, then turned to Sarah. Your contracts with my agency will be dissolved by morning. You'll be free to choose your own representation, your own path. The real roles, the ones you earn on your own merit, they'll mean something now. As he moved toward the door, Sarah called after him. Steve, what you said about my talent, about seeing something in me, was any of that real? He paused with his hand on the doorknob, and when he turned back, his smile was the first genuine expression they'd seen from him all evening. Kid, that was the only thing that was ever real. You don't need puppet masters or revenge schemes or elaborate manipulations. You never did. After he left, Vinny and Sarah sat in the quiet of the living room, surrounded by the debris of torn papers and overturned assumptions. Outside, Bakersfield continued its sleepy existence, unaware that one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries had just walked down its tree-lined streets toward an uncertain but finally honest future. So what now, Grandpa? Vinny looked at his granddaughter, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time without the shadow of his own guilt distorting his vision, and saw strength he'd never recognized before. Now we figure out how to live with the truth. All of it. The mantle clock continued its steady ticking, no longer counting down to reckoning, but simply marking time as it passed, precious, irreplaceable, and finally free.